Hi, my presentation on my country, my African country that I was given to follow up on and observe and keep a watch on was Namibia. Namibia is a very uh, dynamic country, I would say. It's very different than most African countries. It has a very different type of economy. It has very different, uh, varying uh, laws and norms and societal norms and economic policies and very. It's very interesting to look at. When you first look at Namibia, you realize that number one, it's so diverse to the point that the language within Namibia, the main language, along with the African languages, was German. German was very popular within Namibia, and it was ruled by it was a German colony before, so German was very prominent. Now, looking at this country, we know that this was with South Africa. They were one country at one point during the apartheid, and when the apartheid happened and broke off, Namibia got its own independence. Now, when Namibia got its own independence, it had very different ideologies, very different ways of thinking than South Africa, or than countries such as Cameroon and countries such as Nigeria had very different ways of handling its own economies and its own policies, right? So, regarding its economy, Namibia is a parliamentary democracy. It has a ruler who is elected, and he runs for a certain amount of time, and then he steps down after a certain amount of time. And the transition recently went very smoothly. There was no issues, no problems, as opposed to other African countries where you look at, for example, you look at Egypt, and you see that there's such political tension and so many issues, and it's different. In Namibia, people are more open-minded and they're more open to accepting things. There is political tension, but there's not anywhere near as much political tension in Namibia as uh, uh, anywhere near as much political tension there is anywhere compared to Namibia. Namibia has very little political tension. When you look at the policies economically, what it's based on, Namibia is based on mining, which is interesting because the most uh, the industries are based on mining. When you look at different African countries, you see different things like trade but mining is something that is very huge, and it goes a long way for Namibia to the point where they now even have tourism within Namibia, where people are coming to Namibia as tourists, right? So Namibia has definitely developed a lot faster than people would expect because it recently broke off from the apartheid, recently got its own economy, recently got its own government, right? So something interesting to note about Namibia is that it excelled in its own political ways. Although its population is very little, it's 2.1 million. For a land that size, it's very little. But however, uh, the economy still is at a very good level. When we look at Namibia, we know that Namibia is very liberal-minded. Because it's liberal-minded, it's interesting to see some of their ideologies and some of their contradictions as well. For example, when we look at the socioeconomic status of women, it's mind-boggling to see that a liberal country such as Namibia, which is considered liberal, uh, as opposed to the other countries that are out there within Africa, right? It's liberal, but the way they treat women is still very primitive. The status of women is still very primitive. There's a lot of rape that goes on within Namibia, and a lot of women are constantly raped and constantly harassed, and there's a lot of crimes against women within Namibia. Now, another practice that's still practiced within Namibia, which is surprising because it's not an Islamic or Muslim-dominated country. It has very few Muslims, if any at all. 90% is Christian, and then the rest are, they're from African. They have their own African religion. Muslims are very rare to find within Namibia. Now, often it's assumed that female circumcision goes hand in hand with Islam, but it doesn't. It's more of an African practice, and because it's an African practice, in Namibia it still exists. But a liberal country such as that still practices this. It's very common, and it's not as when we really look at the specifics of the female circumcision, it's very different in other countries it's not as harmful. In Namibia, it's very harmful. The way they do it is very harsh and brutal, to the point where it's causing women several different problems. Socioeconomic status of women is very low within Namibia. I also had to look at Namibia and see the the role of the diseases, and how it is, how life is there. And there's a lot of diseases. AIDS is the most common disease within Namibia, and it's very common amongst people. There's a lot of issues with that, and it's causing their average life expectancy is only 52 years. It's very low, one of the lowest within the world. So it shows that even though this is a liberal country and it's modeling a Western ideology, it's still very limited, and it's still, although it's doing it's decent economically, it's not necessarily decent or comparable to other countries that are more conservative, uh, that are still up there, even though they're not following a Western ideology. Namibia's chances of growing are without a doubt. You have to remain optimistic, because they've proved themselves over and over, and it's a relatively a new country. They found their independence recently. So there's a lot of room to grow for Namibia, and a lot of hope for Namibia. But some of the things that I had to come across monitoring Namibia was their economic policies and where they are economically, what their trade is based on, how the economy differs within Namibia, and if the political aspects of Namibia, and the role of women in Namibia, and the discrimination. Again, it's very surprising that there's so much discrimination, and the role of women is so limited, even in Namibia. When the ideology is so liberal, it's very shocking to see that. And then also just looking at the life there in terms of the diseases and what's going on over there, and you see that life is it's a struggle wherever you go. And this is my presentation for the country of Namibia. Thank you.